based on the separate rectangular boxes within that exhibit?
Yes, I do.
Tell the jury, please, how you can so recognize those exhibits, those items within the exhibit, excuse me.
On each item, I would place my name, my initials, and the case number, the date and time and that they were collected and where they were collected from. And this was my handwriting and my initials on it.
Okay.
On both of them.
All right. And in your work on this case, did it bear a specific Tampa Police Department investigation number?
Yes.
And is that number the same as the number assigned to all police reports and supplements generated by other officers or investigators that worked on this investigation?
For this one case, yes.
Okay, thank you. And any other separate case on any other individual or any other offense would bear its own separate TPD number?
Correct.
Okay. So, for specificity, Exhibit Q, the manila envelope, has how many containers in front of you?
2.
And each container contained a swab from one specific location that you took on June 30th of 2010 from either the surface or contents within that red Camry, is that right?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury from, well, does each box have a description, excuse me, each of the separate 2 containers within the manila envelope comprising Exhibit Q, does each of those boxes have a description written by you on it at the time you collected them from where you, describing where you obtained those swabs from?
Yes.
Could you read each of those 2 to the jury, please?
The first one is an unknown substance from the interior door handle of the passenger side front door, and that was collected at 14:52 hours. The second one is an unknown substance from the door lock window controls on the interior passenger side front door, and that was collected at 14:55 hours.
Okay. Your Honor, I should have done this a moment ago. I neglected to. I would move State's Q into evidence.
Total?
Okay. Yes, I'm sorry, Judge. Hard for me to stand still. Sorry. So, did the witness say 6?
6, yes.
All right. Do you recognize each of those 6 boxes?
Yes, I do.
And do you recognize each of those as bearing your initials and the TPD case number assigned to this investigation?
Yes.
And did you place a description of each of on each of those boxes detailing the locations on or within the vehicle from which you obtained a swab?
Yes.
And did you process them and obtain these swabs in the manner you described earlier in your testimony?
Correct.
Your Honor, I move into evidence State Exhibit letter X.
Counsel? No objection. X will be received.
Would you, I guess, just take them one at a time and let us know where, from what surfaces or locations you obtained these swabs?
We got an unknown substance from the exterior passenger side rear door. Another one, unknown substance from the underside of the exterior passenger side front door handle. An unknown substance from exterior rear passenger side door front frame. Unknown substance from roof near passenger side rear door.
Excuse me for one moment, officer. Showing you what was recently admitted as State's Exhibit P28. Does this photograph show the general location from which you observe or collected that swab that you most recently described?
Yes, it's going to be in this general area.
And again, P29, does that show the general area from which you collected that swab?
Yes.
A more close-up view?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And continue with your reading of the individual boxes.
We got an unknown substance from the passenger side rear door. Unknown substance from the interior passenger side front door armrest.
Okay. And when you wrote the phrase unknown substances or substance on each of those boxes, was that because you purposely do not express an opinion as to whether there's biological substance there or what the nature of it would be?
Correct, because it's undetermined by me at that time.
And it's not your job to do so, is that correct?
Correct.
Showing you P26, did you also collect and photograph two handwritten, for lack of a better phrase, signs on paper indicating lost tag and the number?
Yes.
As shown in P26?
Yes.
All right. Showing you what's in evidence as P10, when you photograph, is that, there we go. During your processing of the red Toyota Camry, did you observe, as indicated on P10, right behind the right front wheel well on the passenger side, any what appeared to be splattered, dried soil or mud?
Yes.
And is that shown on this photograph?
Yes, it is. This is the passenger side front door, and this is the mud or the dirt that he's referring to.
And showing you again, or for the first time, P12.
This is the same thing, just a different angle. This is the tire. You have the spatted.
Keep your voice up, please.
I'm sorry. The mud that we just discussed, and this is the mud flap from the back side of the tire.
And that mud flap from the back side of the tire, as shown in P12, did that contain attached to it, as shown on this exhibit, what appears to be soil and grass?
Yes.
Could you show the jury where that is?
Right here. All that area.
That will be on.
Yes, sir.
May the witness take the stand.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Now you go from the officer. Now, before I forget, while I have them in my hands, once you collected the swabs contained within the boxes, within the containers Q and X, what did you do with them, the exhibits themselves?
I would seal them with evidence tape, put my initials on them, and then package them and put them into evidence.
And evidence evidence is a secure evidence room within the confines of the Tampa Police Department?
Correct.
Let me show you what's in evidence as Exhibit P23. Are you able to see that from where you sit, the officer?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Is this a photograph of the front passenger compartment, including floorboard and open glove box as it appeared during your processing of that red Toyota Camry?
Yes, it is.
And did you attempt to, or did you process the individual items that are shown on the floorboard and the contents of the glove box as you described in an attempt to lift fingerprints?
Yes.
Were you able to, other than what you've already described as that cruise control box, from where you did obtain fingerprints, did you obtain any fingerprints from any of these items shown here, including food packets, or club flyers?
No.
Did you also attempt, was there a, did you attempt to get dashboard fingerprints?
No, I did not.
Okay. Would you perhaps referring to the bottom of the first page that has your items processed? Second line from the bottom. Indicates dashboard.
Which one are you referring to?
Okay, my question was probably vague. Did you did you process the dashboard of the front of that front compartment within the vehicle for fingerprints? Second line from the bottom, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, the dashboard, when I refer to the dashboard, and this, I refer to the center console where the radio would be, because that would be the only place that would be conducive for fingerprints.
Oh, thank you. And were you able to lift any fingerprints from that location?
No.
Did this vehicle have a compact disc player?
I can't recall from the top of my head.
Would you refer to your report to the very last line below the dashboard?
It did have a CD player in it.
Okay, and you know that because you've documented that you tried to lift fingerprints from a CD within a CD player?
Yes, I took the CD out of the CD player and processed that for fingerprints as well.
Okay, and then you weren't able to find any from the CD within the CD player, is that correct?
No, I was not.
Okay. And among other things, would you have been processing the vehicle to determine whether you found any firearms, bullets, or bullets components, including shell casings, within that vehicle?
Yeah, we would be looking for anything of that nature.
And during your 3 or 4 hour search with Detective Houston, you did not find any firearms or bullets or bullet components, including shell casings, is that correct?
No, we did not.
We have a moment. You have used the phrase conducive for fingerprints in talking about an area of what you described as the dashboard.
Yes.
A minute ago. Can you describe for the jury what you mean by that phrase, conducive for fingerprints and processing?
Typically, flat, like shiny surfaces are conducive for fingerprints. Any textured surfaces, being like the dashboard where it would be a leather surface, those are not conducive for prints.
So for instance, if the Camry had cloth seats, would that cloth portion of the seat be conducive for fingerprints?
No, it would not.
All right, thank you. No further questions of Officer Walker.
Questions, Councilman? Yes, thank you.
You need the photographs, Mr. Howard?
No, but I do need X and Y, please, if I may.
X and Q?
X and Q, excuse me. Yes. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Please, court and counsel. Good morning, Ms. Larkin.
Good morning.
I wanted to ask you about your experience at Tampa Police Department. Did I hear you say correctly that you were a crime scene technician for 5 years?
Just about 5 years, yes.
Okay, and what kind of training did you receive to make yourself into a crime scene technician?
I went to St. Petersburg College and I got my crime scene certificate along with my associate's degree. And from there, I got hired on with Tampa Police Department and I got on-the-job training.
Okay. How long a course of study is that academic part of your training?
It was about 1.5 to 2 years.
Was that all in the field of crime scene technician methodology, or were there more general educational courses as well?
For the crime scene certificate, it was all specific for crime scene.
Okay. So it's not a degree, it's a certificate program?
Correct.
Okay. And then inside the Tampa Police Department, you would have gotten on-the-job training from crime scene technicians, supervisors, and others as you did your work, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that was what your status was at the time of these events in June of 2010?
Correct.
And how long had you been doing it at that time?
At that time, probably about 3.5 years.
Okay. You are currently in a different status.
Yes, I am.
And explain to us what that different status is.
I retired my position as a crime scene technician. I went to the Law Enforcement Academy, and I got hired on back with Tampa Police Department in the capacity of a police officer.
Okay, so when you're a crime scene technician in the Tampa Police Department, you're not a certified law enforcement officer who's received basic police training. Is that correct?
No, it's a civilian position.
Okay. And what you did was to go to the police academy, go through the courses necessary to become a licensed law enforcement officer.
Yes.
I see. Why did you make the career change? What was your reason for doing that?
It was to better my career in law enforcement.
You just wanted to become a law enforcement officer?
Yes.
All right. You've used the word a number of times, and I know it's a word of art that crime scene technicians use, the word processing. And you helped, I believe, Detective Houston process the red Toyota Camry at the police impound facility.
Yes, I did.
Okay. When you use that word processing, do you go through the same process each time, or does it vary depending upon the facts and variables of a particular situation?
There's a general methodology to it. First, I would start with my photographs and then move on to either evidence collection or fingerprinting, depending on the situation.
Okay. So there's pretty much a step-by-step procedure you follow with variations depending on the specific facts of a specific instance.
Yes.
I see. And the first thing a general visual inspection of the vehicle, in the case of a vehicle?
Yes, it is.
Walk around it, you look at it, you look inside it?
Correct.
Okay. And then you take photographs?
Yes.
In the process of taking those photographs, do you open doors and trunks and so on to show the interior as well as the exterior?
Yes, I do.
Would it be after that you begin then the collection of physical evidence such as latent fingerprints and other DNA swabs or other type evidence?
Yes.
Okay. Are the same kind of protective procedures used when you open or cardboard items, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so you use that on some of the items in the vehicle?
Yes, I did.
Any other methods that you used?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. And there are some other methods that can be used under certain circumstances, isn't that correct?
Yes.
Okay. When you took the items from the car, and there are a number of them, I don't want to go through each one of them individually, but there was a computer, there was a DVD player, there were some food items, I'm assuming food packaging and that sort of thing, in the car, is that right?
Yes.
There were a number of cigarette butts, I assume in an ashtray, is that right?
Yes.
There was an ink pen, some coins, pennies I believe you said, a club flyer, some kind of advertisement of some sort, is that correct?
Yes.
And that may not be an exhaustive list, but those are some of the items you found inside the car.
Correct.
Now when you process those, you would process the different types of things differently, would you not?
How do you mean?
Well, for example, take the computer. How did you process the computer?
With black powder.
So you're searching for fingerprints with using the black powder method?
The same powder that I used to process the vehicle.
Okay. Same with the DVD player?
Yes.
And were you able to get any latent prints from those items?
Let me refer to my report real quick.
You may have told us, and I may have just not noted my notes, so I apologize if I'm repeating.
Yes, I was able to get 3 lifts from each of them.
3 from each?
Yes, for a total of 6.
Okay. Were you able to get any latent prints from any of the paper items that you used in anhydride on?
No.
Okay. Any other of the, for lack of a better term, portable contents of the vehicle that you tested that you were able to get any fingerprints from?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
The other items, the portable items, the items you could take out of the car, were you able to get latents on any of those other items, like the ink pen, the food packaging, cigarette butts, anything like that?
The only thing I was able to get a fingerprints off of was there was a metal cruise control box that was in the glove compartment.
Okay.
I lifted two off of there.
Everything else came from the actual structure of the vehicle itself?
Correct.
Okay. Now, with the cigarette butts, you wouldn't test those for fingerprints, would you?
No, I would not.
Did you preserve them?
Yes.
And why would you preserve them?
Collected them in case they wanted to do any type of DNA testing on them.
Okay. So sometimes they can be tested because people put a cigarette in their mouth and saliva gets on the cigarette, and that can be DNA tested. Is that what you?
Correct, or skin cells.
Skin cell, right. And did you do any swabs of those, or just simply collect the butts?
I just collected the cigarette butts.
Okay. Would you agree that as far as latent prints, and just so the jury's clear on it, they probably are clear on it, but latent prints, that word implies that it's not clearly visible.
Correct.
To the naked eye.
Yes.
Right? As an example, when my dog rides in my car and he puts his wet nose up against the glass, that's pretty visible.
Yes.
Right? But there are other surfaces that people may touch and deposit oils showing fingerprints, which you can't see with your naked eye.
Correct. That's why we use the black powder to enhance them.
And that's why you call them latent prints.
Correct.
They're latent or hidden from the naked eye.
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree that it is very commonplace if you're searching for fingerprints in a vehicle to find the fingerprints of the owner and or driver and members of his or her family or frequent passengers? That would be a very common thing, wouldn't it?
Typically, yes.
The boxes that you described had the method by which you sought to collect samples of DNA or apparent possible DNA materials.
Correct.
You talked about using the sterile swabs wet with distilled water.
Yes.
And once you had swiped that against whatever test substance you wanted to collect, putting them in a box.
Yes.
How is that sealed and protected from external influences?
With evidence tape.
Is it an airproof and waterproof container?
No, it's not. It can't be.
Okay. So what you do is you put it in a box, close the box, and tape the top of the box. Is that the idea?
Yes, but the box has to have air holes just to preserve it so it doesn't mold or anything like that.
Okay. So it is exposed to some degree to the environment.
Correct.
And that's what I think you referred to as sealing, is putting that tape on there?
Yes.
Okay. Did you do that in each instance of the boxes that you discussed with Mr. Pruner?
Yes, I did.
And where do those go from the time you collect them? Do you put them in a container, or do you put them in a refrigerator or a bag? Or how do you do that?
I would typically put them into a manila envelope like you have seen them in up there, and then I would seal that and then put it into our evidence section.
Can you put a label on it with a number and all of that information?
Yes.
Okay. And you store it temporarily, and then at some point later, you collect those and take them to the evidence room and they're checked in, is that right?
Typically, or I would bring it right to the evidence room.
Personal.
Yes, personally.
Okay. Now, you do not know which, if any, or whether these various items you collected, the latent prints, the possible biological materials, or the physical items, you do not know whether they were sent on for subsequent testing of any kind to Florida Department of Law Enforcement or any other lab. Is that correct?
No, that's all determined by the detectives on the case.
So your role, once you've collected it, your role is over and you wouldn't be able to tell us about what happened after that?
No.
All right. I don't think you told us, and if you did, I missed it. There was a photograph, I believe it was states P26, the pieces of paper that said lost tag, and I believe had a tag number written on it.
Yes.
Handwritten on it. Did you test those items of paper for the fingerprints utilizing the anhydride chemical process you've described already?
No, I was not requested to by the detective.
Okay. So basically, you don't always make an independent decision as to what to test. You ask for guidance from the detective who's assigned as the crime scene detective.
Yes.
That in this case was Detective Eric Houston.
Yes, it was. Okay.
So if he said, you know, I want you to test that, you did. You might on your own test things you knew were obvious. Is that correct? Like I think you mentioned the dashboard.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. You were asked by Mr. Pruner about a comment you had made that some surfaces were conducive to the leaving of fingerprints and others were not.
Yes.
Correct? And you mentioned a couple of examples of flat, would you say flat, shiny surfaces, I think your words were?
Yeah, or non-porous surfaces.
Okay, hard
surfaces.
Hard surfaces, like metal as an example.
That's a good example, yes. That's a good example, yes. Glass is another one.
Right, okay. And that you also said textured surfaces were less likely to produce fingerprints.
Correct.
Okay. There are other factors, though, aren't there, ma'am, that influence and affect whether you are able to find fingerprints?
There's a lot of environmental factors that would go along with that.
For example, on a hot day in Florida, if a person's hands and body are sweating and there's a lot of oil in the skin, it's more likely to leave a fingerprint regardless of the surface we're talking about. Isn't that true?
Typically, yes.
Okay. You also can't tell when you lift the print when it was deposited there. Isn't that true?
Correct.
So if you were to come test my car and find my print, you couldn't tell whether I drove it yesterday or 2 weeks ago?
Correct.
Okay. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to bring up to you, Ms. Larkin, things you've already seen. The state's exhibits Q and X, which I believe are you testified of the boxes of the swabs, is that correct?
Yeah.
I just want to give you those and ask you to help me with some information about those. Mr. Pruner asked you about how you knew where they were collected, when they were collected, whether they were collected by you. And I think you told him, and I'm paraphrasing, I think you told him that you write on the packaging.
Correct.
And sign the packaging, collected by you on a certain date and time at a certain place, and describe it as best you can.
Yes.
And that's how you were able to get up here and give us at least an approximation of where you found some of those samples, because you had it recorded on the packaging.
Yes.
All right. Is there information on those envelopes, even though it may not have been put there by you, that would indicate to you, looking at them, that in the chain of custody, they were sent on to somebody else, like the FDLE lab, as an example?
Yes.
And so just so the folks understand, you're the first person in the chain of custody, because you're the one that finds these things and collects them.
Yes.
And each person subsequently who handles them or has possession of them has to sign and notate that to document it.
And
Is that
record
right?
it. Yes.
That's ordinary police procedure.
Yes.
So if these things were sent to the FDLE lab or any other lab or any other person in the chain of custody, some kind of an indicator, a record on that packaging would be made by that person that they received those items on a certain date from a certain person.
Typically, yes.
Okay. Do you see any indications on any of those packaging, the packages of the two exhibits I've given you, that indicates whether they were sent to labs or not?
On Q, the writing on the front says items returned from DNA labs, CoCab Curtis, and the TPD report number for the case.
That's in Q, okay. What about?
That's on Q.
How about X?
On X, there's labels on the front. Just these would be our evidence tracking labels, and there's initials, and it looks like a note that 9/16/2010 Detective Duran removed items 6 and 7, and then in parentheses it says FDLE exhibits 12 and 14.
Okay, so now correct me if I'm wrong, was X the one that had 6 boxes in it? I may have them mixed up.
Yes, X has 6.
Oh, and so there's a notation that Detective Duran, who was the lead detective in this case, took those out of evidence and delivered 2 of them to the lab, is that right?
That's just what the note says. I don't know if that's, if...
That's the way you all document what you do, isn't it?
That must be the way that they document it. When they remove those swabs, I can't testify to what they document and how they do it.
But you have been trained that documentation like that is very important, isn't it?
Of course.
You can't have evidence that may be used in court being in the hands of people you don't know about.
Correct.
Objection, Judge. That's outside of her experience.
They say you have been trained that is the purpose of documentation, to prevent any other person having handled the matter who did not document that handling.
I've been trained to document the items that I possess to control the chain of custody.
Okay. Your Honor, may I have a moment?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Ms. Larkin. I have no further questions for you at this time. Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Attorney, to redirect.
Briefly, Officer Larkin, do you have personal knowledge or training as to the standard operating procedures of Florida Department of Law Enforcement Laboratory or DNA International Labs concerning their documentation of their chain of custody?
No, I do not.
What, if any, precautions did you take during your photographing of the red Toyota Camry to prevent the destruction or elimination of fingerprints from surfaces of that vehicle?
What did I do to preserve that? You're asking?
So that you wouldn't inadvertently ruin or eliminate fingerprints from surfaces during your photographing.
I used, of course, gloves for any surface that I touched in or outside the vehicle, and did not touch any areas on the vehicle that would be processed for fingerprints.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Will this be released?
Yes, sir.
Counsel?
Yes, Your Honor.
And be released. Thank you very much. Please call your next witness, state.
State will call Susan Delage. Scott, will you get
Stand right here, face the clerk, if you swear.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give in this call to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Right this way, please.
Please slide up a little close to the microphone and tell us your full name, please.
Susan Delage.
Spell your first and last names.
Susandelage.
Thank you. Proceed.
Good morning, Ms. Delage.
Good morning.
Can you tell the jurors how you're employed?
I am a latent fingerprint specialist with the Tampa Police Department.
Okay. How long have you been employed as a latent print specialist with the Tampa Police?
9 years.
Before your work as a latent print specialist, were you employed by the Tampa Police Department in some other capacity?
Yes, I was. For 15 years, I was a crime scene investigator.
Okay. And that would be the personnel who go out to crime scenes and process.
What a fingerprint is. The surface of your hands and your feet is very different than any other part of your body. Your ridges are raised above the surface. You have tiny pores all over your hands and your feet that are constantly exuding moisture. 98.5% moisture, the other 1.5% is like organic and inorganic compounds. When you touch an item, you leave a reproduction of those ridges on the item based upon the moisture that's on your hands. And that is what a latent print is. Now, latent meaning hidden means that you can't see that print until it's processed with some type of medium, either fingerprint powder or some type of chemical that will actually bring the print up.
When a latent print, in other words, a print that has been lifted from a crime scene, when that's submitted to your section of the Tampa Police Department, that's called the identification section, is that right?
That is correct. It's the identification forensic unit.
Okay. When it's submitted to that section that you work in, are you on occasion requested to compare that to see if you can identify that to another type of print?
Yes, we are.
And the prints you're comparing that to, are those normally prints where the person who those prints are from are known?
Yes, they are.
And is that referred to as a known print?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And how are known prints normally collected?
Known prints are a purpose set of prints that are taken with printer's ink. You roll printer's ink on the entire hand and on the entire 10 fingers, and then they're placed on a contrasting card, a 10 print card that will record all of the friction ridge detail on the hands and the fingers.
Is that also sometimes called an inked print?
Yes, it is.
What does that mean, an inked print? Why is it called an inked print?
Well, you're taking printer's ink and you're actually rolling the printer's ink onto the skin so that it records the images of the ridge detail that's raised.
When a person is arrested and booked in the Hillsborough County Jail, you familiar with the process they use or have been used for the last several years there to record a person's fingerprints?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and can you explain that to the jury?
In the booking process, the fingerprints are actually scanned. We've gotten a little away from the ink, we've gotten technologically advanced, and the fingers are actually scanned with a camera. But it's the same recorded ridge detail. It's then placed on the card exactly the same way that ink would be.
All right. And is the person who the prints are being taken from, are they required to roll their prints across a glass surface where there's some type of a recording device underneath it?
Yes, it's a glass plate and the camera's underneath, so that when the fingers are actually rolled onto the plate, it actually captures the image and then it's printed onto the card through the scanner.
Okay. Normally, if a latent fingerprint is collected or located on an object or a surface in a crime scene, is there any way to date that print or determine how long it's been left there?
No.
All right. Are latent prints always left when a person touches an object?
No. There are so many variables that come into play with touching an object and leaving a print or not leaving a print. One of the most important is obviously your hands, because your moisture being exuded out of your hands, that's what's leaving the reproduction of the ridge detail. If someone may be sweating profusely, obviously a lot more sweat's coming out. The surface could be more wet, therefore leaving more of a smudged print. Another one is the actual surface itself. Is the surface conducive? What I mean by conducive is when you think of a shiny, hard, non-porous item and you touch it, the reproduction of your ridges are going to stand on the outside of that object. However, if you have something like non-smooth, corrugated, or rough, your ridge detail is not going to stay on top of that surface. Or again, a porous surface, wood, for instance, or anything that the fingerprint residue would go through. So that's another variable. Another one would be your heat. Because your fingerprint is 98.5% water, if you have a lot of heat, your fingerprint moisture is going to evaporate. So there are so many variables when taking into consideration whether or not a latent fingerprint can be left on a surface.
Just a real quick follow-up. When you say heat, are you talking about body heat or environmental heat?
Environmental heat, like if it's outside, we're in Florida, so there is a lot of heat. So the moisture can be evaporated by the heat.
Were latent fingerprints in this case, involving the homicides of officers Kokap and Curtis, were latent prints in this case that were lifted from a Toyota Camry, were they submitted to your division for possible identification comparisons?
Yes, they were.
All right. And did you compare all of the latent prints that were taken from that Toyota Camry and submitted to the identification section, did you compare those to the known fingerprints of Courtney Brantley and Dontae Morris, the defendant in this case?
Yes, I did.
All right. Were you able to identify any of the latent fingerprints from the Camry to Courtney Brantley?
Yes, I was.
Can you tell the jurors what latent fingerprints or where they came from on the Camry?
Your Honor, may I look at my notes? Out of the fingerprint submissions that were entered into our area, 3 latent fingerprints were identified to Courtney Brantley.
Okay, and what parts or what sections of the Camry did they come from?
One was on the driver's side rear quarter panel of the Camry. Another fingerprint was from the exterior driver's side front door. And a third print for Courtney Brantley was on the Dell laptop from the passenger side rear seat floorboard.
Okay. And were you able to identify any of the latent prints from the Camry to the defendant's known fingerprints?
No, I was not.
Were all of the prints from the Camry that were lifted from the Camry, were they all of comparison value?
No, they were not.
Okay, and what does that term comparison value, what does that mean?
When a fingerprint is lifted, it's a partial print. You may not get all of the recorded detail of the finger. When we analyze a print, we're looking for enough minutia or points of identity in the latent fingerprint in order to make the comparison. If the fingerprint lacks that sufficient clarity and detail, then there really would not be enough there to compare to anyone.
Okay. May I have one moment, Judge?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, I'll send to the witness.
Questions, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Slush.
Good morning.
All right, just to make the record absolutely clear, you compared but did not identify the prints of Mr. Morris.
That is correct.
All right, and you've already indicated that issues like heat and environmental factors can affect not only the ability to leave a latent fingerprint, but also its preservation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. Is there any possibility that fingerprints can be, do they eventually, because they are composed mostly of water, do they eventually deteriorate?
There's really no specific dating of a fingerprint. So a fingerprint can be on an object for a long time. There's really no scientific way to date how long it's going to be on the item or how long it would be before it dissipates.
All right, so there's no way to predict when it was there or how long it has been there.
That is correct.
Okay. In your experience, can a latent fingerprint of comparison quality exist for many days?
In my experience, yes.
Okay, weeks?
I really can't date it. There really is no scientific methodology to date how long an item has a fingerprint on it or how long that fingerprint will last.
Okay. And do you follow a four-part process in terms of making an identification?
Are you speaking of ACE?
I am.
Yes, I do.
Okay, could you tell the jury what that acronym stands for?
Absolutely. ACE is an acronym. The A stands for the analysis process. As I originally was telling you, that when you analyze a fingerprint, you're trying to determine whether or not there is enough in the latent print present to compare. So that sometimes can be the most painstaking because you're actually looking very closely and scrutinizing the latent print to determine whether or not you can go on to the comparison phase, which is the C. The comparison phase is then when you actually will take that known print that I talked about with your unknown latent print, you put them side by side and you do the comparison process. The E in the ACE is the evaluation phase, where you determine in the evaluation phase whether or not you have an identification or whether or not you have no identification. And then the last part of the ACE process is the V for the verification, and every latent fingerprint that is identified is also compared and verified by another competent latent examiner.
Okay. In your experience, have you had disagreements when you attempt to complete the verification part of that process?
No.
Okay, never once?
Never once.
Is there a set number of points that you use to compare a latent fingerprint of comparison quality to a known fingerprint?
No, there's not. Back in 1973, many delegates from the International Association for Identification all convened and determined that with our methodology and the scientific process, that no set number of points is needed to affect an identification. You use the totality, your education, your experience, your training, and you take into consideration all the levels of detail of the fingerprint, and therefore they determined that no set number was needed to affect an identification.
Okay. So you could base your opinion on just one point?
I would not say I base it on any number of points, but the totality of the fingerprint.
All right. Is there an acceptable error rate for latent fingerprint comparison?
There would be no error rate.
Okay. Are there ever errors made?
Sure, I'm sure there are errors made.
Okay. Have you personally made any errors that were brought to your attention later?
Well, as far as latent fingerprint comparison and identification, absolutely not. Do I make a spelling error occasionally? Yes, I do.
No, I didn't mean that. I meant in comparison against known.
Absolutely not.
Okay. Is there room in this process for error?
No, there's not.
Okay. So to your knowledge, it's never happened with you or with the experts verifying your work?
No, it has not.
If I may have just a moment, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
No additional questions.
You redirect?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
May this witness be released?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And released. Thank you. Go ahead, recess. Our members of the jury have been sitting for close to an hour and a half. Let's go ahead and take our morning recess. Please don't discuss the case during the break. We'll bring you back in about 20 minutes. If you need longer, that's right. Just let us know.
All right.
The jurors up to be recessed till 10:25. Don't be seated.